Get out of my house, old man. You're not my father. You're just a burden we've been carrying. My son-in-law said that to my face while my daughter stood 2 feet behind him, saying nothing. I left that same night. I didn't argue, didn't beg, didn't explain. I just packed one bag, walked out the front door of the house I'd helped him buy, and drove away. What they didn't know, what nobody in that family knew, was that I was driving away with $4.3 million sitting in accounts they'd never heard of. The drive from their place in Oakville back into Toronto took 45 minutes on a quiet Thursday night. I had the radio off, just the highway and the dark and my own breathing. I wasn't crying, I wasn't even angry yet. I was doing what I'd always done when something important happened. I was thinking. The folder from my cardiologist was on the passenger seat. Moderate aortic stenosis, manageable with medication, regular monitoring, some lifestyle adjustments. Not a death sentence. I'd expected worse, honestly, after the months of fatigue and the shortness of breath climbing stairs. The doctor had been almost cheerful. Men your age with your otherwise good health, we see this all the time. You follow the program, you've got years ahead of you. 67 years old, and years ahead of me. I'd held onto that on the drive from the clinic to my daughter's house. I'd wanted to share it with someone who loved me. That was 3 hours ago. My daughter's name is Diane. She's 34, teaches grade 3 at a public school in Mississauga, and married a man named Russell 6 years ago. Russell sells commercial HVAC equipment and talks about it constantly, as though the rest of the world shares his enthusiasm for ventilation systems. I have tried, over 6 years, to find something genuine to like about Russell. I found one thing: he's punctual. That's it. That's the whole list. I moved in with them 2 years ago, after my wife passed. Breast cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the end. When Eleanor died, the house in Scarborough where we'd raised Diane felt enormous and wrong. Every room was a version of before. Diane had called me that first winter, voice careful and kind. "Dad, we have the space. Come stay with us for a while. Get your feet under you." I went. I sold the Scarborough house for $812,000, which I told nobody about. I deposited it into an account I'd had since the 90s, separate from the joint accounts Eleanor and I had shared. I told Diane the housing market had been disappointing, that I'd come away with not much after the mortgage and the estate costs. She didn't press. She never pressed about money. Russell, I noticed, paid closer attention. Every month I gave Diane $2,000 in cash. My contribution to the household, I said. Help with groceries, utilities, whatever they needed. She always accepted it with a small, grateful smile. Russell always watched the envelope change hands without a word. I had the small bedroom at the end of the hall. Their house was a semi-detached in Oakville, bought 4 years ago with a $40,000 gift from me that I described as all I could manage right now. Russell had shaken my hand afterward with both of his and called me a lifesaver. Diane had hugged me for a long time. The $40,000 represented less than 1% of what I actually had. I was watching to see what it bought me. For the first year, it bought genuine warmth. Dinners together, weekend drives, Sunday mornings with coffee and the newspaper. Diane checked in on me, asked how my grief was settling, sat with me through the hard anniversaries. I was grateful for her. I still am, in certain ways. The second year, things shifted. Russell started working longer hours, or claiming to. Diane picked up a tutoring side job 3 evenings a week. I was left alone in the house more. Fine. I preferred quiet. I read, walked, cooked for myself, didn't complain. But I noticed when Russell stopped including me in conversations at dinner. I noticed when plans were made without mentioning whether I was invited. I noticed the way Diane laughed differently when Russell wasn't in the room. Lighter, more like herself. The week before my cardiology appointment, I'd overheard something I wasn't meant to hear. I'd been in the kitchen making tea just after 10 at night. Their bedroom door was down the hall, slightly open. Russell's voice carried. "How long is this going on?" he said. "He's been here 2 years, Diane." "He's my father." Her voice was quieter. I strained. "He's retired. He's got nothing going on, and he's turning our home into a senior center. I want our space back. I want to be able to walk around my own house without his reading glasses on every surface." "Russell, I'm serious. He's not sick. He's not helpless. He can get an apartment. There are senior communities, assisted living, whatever. This is not sustainable. Silence. Then Diane, smaller now, if you want me to talk to him. I want him gone by the end of the month. Tell him it's better for his health. Tell him anything. Just handle it. I stood at the kitchen counter with my tea going cold in my hands, and I understood very clearly what my 2 years in that house had actually been. A waiting room, a charity arrangement with a deadline. And that deadline apparently was now. The next day I went to my cardiology appointment. Came home with the folder. Found them both in the living room, Russell with his feet on the coffee table, Diane grading papers on the couch. I said I had medical news. Russell muted the television. Diane looked up. I explained the diagnosis. Moderate aortic stenosis, manageable. Long-term prognosis, good with proper care. Well, that's a relief, Diane said. She meant it. Her hand found my arm briefly. Russell said, so you're not actually in danger. Not immediately, no. Good. He unmuted the television. Diane walked me to the kitchen and made me tea and asked careful questions about the medication and the follow-up schedule. She was kind. She was also going to tell me to leave because her husband had told her to. I could see it forming behind her eyes, the rehearsed conversation she hadn't figured out how to start yet. She didn't have to start it. Russell did, that same evening while Diane was in the shower. He came into the kitchen where I was washing my mug, stood in the doorway with his arms crossed. I think it's time we talked about your situation. I turned off the tap, dried my hands, looked at him. You've been here 2 years. You're healthy. You're mobile. You've got income from whatever pension and savings you've got. There's no reason you need to be living with us. He said it like a business case, like he'd rehearsed it in the car. We need our space back. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal. He said that. Get out of my house, old man. You're not my father. You're just a burden we've been carrying. That's when Diane appeared in the hallway in her robe, hair wet, eyes going wide. She said his name. He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on me like he was closing a negotiation. I looked at my daughter. She looked at the floor. I went to my room, packed one bag, clothes, documents, the lockbox from the back of my closet, left everything else. The next morning before either of them was up, I put an envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside was $2,000 in cash and a note that said, last month's contribution. I've made other arrangements. Thank you for the hospitality, Dad. I drove to the Marriott on the lakeshore and checked in for a week. Here's what Russell didn't know. What Diane didn't know. What no one in the family knew because Eleanor and I had decided long ago that money was private, that sharing the number created more problems than it solved. I'd spent 31 years building a small commercial cleaning company, nothing glamorous. Office buildings, medical clinics, government facilities, 12 employees at peak, 16 contracts, a reputation in the industry for reliability. I'd sold Walker Clean Solutions, named for my surname, not for Silas Walker from some other story. No, my name is Graham. Graham Holt. I'd sold Graham's commercial services 4 years ago to a national facilities management company out of Calgary. The price, after legal fees and tax, was $4.3 million net. I had not told Diane. I had not told Russell. I had not told my brother in Nova Scotia. I told my accountant, my financial advisor, and my lawyer, all of whom had signed confidentiality agreements years before any of this became relevant. I paid myself a modest RRSP withdrawal each year, just enough to explain my lifestyle. I lived carefully, drove a 2018 Camry, wore the same winter coat for 6 years, helped Diane with $40,000 for her house, and watched Russell shake my hand like I'd given him the last of something. The test had been running for 2 years. I had my results. From the hotel room, I called my financial advisor, Nadia. We'd worked together for 11 years, since she was a junior analyst and I was still running the company. She answered on the second ring. Graham, something's happened? I need $250,000 moved to checking by next Friday. Brief pause. Okay, RSP bonds or the balanced fund? Split it. Whatever's cleanest for tax purposes. Done. Can I ask what's happening? I'm buying a condo. Longer pause. Then carefully, I'll draw up the paperwork. I hung up and opened a real estate app, typed Toronto condos, 800,000 and under. The screen filled with listings, Harbourfront, King West, The Annex, Leslieville. I scrolled through them on the hotel bed with my coat still on and felt, for the first time since Eleanor died, like the future was a thing I could actually see. I found 3 properties worth visiting. Booked a viewing through a buyer's agent named Charles the next morning. Told him I was a cash buyer working within a tight timeline. His whole tone changed inside one sentence. Charles showed me 6 units over 2 days. The third one I walked into, I knew. 15th floor in a building near St. Lawrence Market. Floor-to-ceiling windows, lake view to the south, a proper second bedroom for when Diane's children, my future grandchildren, maybe, came to visit. Listed at $780,000, 2 years old, original owners relocating to Vancouver. I made an offer at asking. Cash, 15-day close. They accepted within 4 hours. I signed papers at my lawyer's office on a Tuesday. The lawyer, a woman named Loretta who'd handled my business sale and Eleanor's estate, slid the transfer documents across her desk without drama. Congratulations, Graham. Fresh start. I signed everything. Walked out into it February afternoon on Bay Street feeling lighter than I had in years. The movers collected my things from the Oakville house on a Wednesday morning while Russell was at work and Diane was teaching. I texted her, coming to collect my belongings. Please leave a key under the mat. She called twice. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message, voice strained, saying she hadn't known what Russell said to me, that she wanted to talk, that she was sorry. I collected my boxes, left the key on the counter. Drove to St. Lawrence Market and bought groceries for my new kitchen. The first week in the condo, I did almost nothing. Unpacked slowly. Took walks along the waterfront. Made coffee in the mornings looking at the lake. The medication was working. The fatigue was lifting. I slept 8 hours a night in a room that was entirely mine. My phone had 7 missed calls from Russell, 4 from Diane, 2 from a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be Russell, calling from his office phone, which told me the personal line wasn't getting through the way he wanted. I didn't answer any of them. On day 9, I called Loretta. I want to update my estate documents, I said, and I want my daughter to know what she's walking away from. Not from me, from the estate. Loretta's voice was carefully neutral. You want her informed of the asset picture. I want her to sit across a desk from you and understand what 2 years of her husband's behavior has cost her family. There was a brief pause. I can arrange that. I'll say you're updating your will and that she's named in documents requiring her acknowledgement. That'll do. Loretta called Diane the following morning. Official sounding. Professional. Your father is making changes to his estate and would like you present as a named party. Standard procedure. Thursday at 2? Diane arrived in Loretta's office on a Thursday, looking like she hadn't slept. She sat down. Loretta slid a summary document across the desk. Portfolio valuation, asset list, property deed for the condo, bank account summary. Diane stared at the number at the top of the page for a long time, long enough that Loretta refilled her water without being asked. This is... Diane's voice stopped. Started again. He told me the house sale hadn't gone well, that he'd come away with very little. Mr. Holt sold his business 4 years ago, Loretta said. The net proceeds were $4.3 million. He has invested conservatively, and the current portfolio value is approximately $4.6. The Scarborough house proceeds are also included in that figure. Diane closed her eyes. Previously, Loretta continued, you were designated as sole beneficiary of the estate. Mr. Holt wanted you to know he's currently reconsidering that arrangement and will be in touch when he's ready to discuss terms. Diane didn't say anything for a moment. Then, the $40,000 for the house. A personal gift at the time, yes. And the $2,000 a month. Loretta nodded. His choice, not his necessity. The silence that followed lasted long enough to be uncomfortable for everyone except Loretta. who had clearly seen this kind of silence before. Diane made it to the elevator before she called Russell. Loretta's office faced the parking lot. She told me later that Diane stood beside her car for 6 minutes, phone pressed to her ear, not moving. Russell called me 11 times in the next 2 hours. His voicemail started professional and became something else. The fourth one said, "Graham, I think there's been a misunderstanding and I'd really like to clear the air." The eighth one said, "Look, what I said was out of line. I admit that, and I think we should sit down like adults." The 11th one said my name twice and then went quiet for several seconds before he hung up. I didn't respond to any of them. Diane's first text arrived that evening, Dad. I didn't know. I need you to know that I didn't know any of it. What Russell said to you, what he'd been saying to me. I should have been braver. I'm so sorry. I read it sitting at my dining room table with a glass of wine and the lake going dark outside the window. Then I put the phone face down and didn't respond. What came next was not something I planned exactly. It was something I allowed to happen. I had lunch with my old accountant, Paul, that Friday. We'd been meeting for lunch every few months for 15 years, the way two men of a certain age maintain a friendship. Scheduled, reliable, moderate portions, no surprises. I told him what had happened. Not all of it. Enough. Paul was a man who knew a lot of people. He also had a daughter in Diane's social circle, a detail I'd been aware of for years and had never used until now. I didn't ask Paul to say anything. I didn't have to. Information shared between two men over lunch in Toronto has a particular half-life, and I understood that within a week the outline of the story would have made its way to the right ears through entirely natural channels. By the following Wednesday, Russell's sister-in-law had posted something vague on Facebook about family loyalty and how you never know what people are really worth until you've pushed them away. The comments filled with exactly the kind of agreement that Facebook comments always fill with. Russell and Diane's names weren't mentioned. They didn't have to be. By Friday, one of Diane's colleagues had asked her, gently, if everything was okay at home because she seemed distracted. Diane had gone pale and changed the subject. Russell, I learned later, had come home that Friday evening to find Diane sitting at the kitchen table with a spreadsheet open on her laptop. She'd been calculating. Their mortgage was $3,400 a month. Her salary covered it with very little room. Russell's income was inconsistent, commission-based, and they'd been relying on his bonus cycle in ways that now felt precarious. The $2,000 a month I'd been contributing, that was gone. The $40,000 in equity from my initial gift represented real value in a house they couldn't have afforded without it. If I chose to call that a loan rather than a gift, the paperwork would need to be checked. I checked with Loretta. There was no promissory note. I had given the $40,000 as a gift with no documentation. That door was closed. I left it closed. I wasn't interested in taking their house. I was interested in something else. 3 weeks after I moved out, my phone rang at 8 in the morning. A number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go. Something made me pick up. "Grandpa?" It took me a full second. "Who is this?" "It's Emma." A young voice, maybe 12. "Diane's daughter. Well, I know you don't know me very well. We only met at Christmas that one time. But Mom's been really sad and she won't tell me what happened, and I found your number in her contacts." I had met Emma twice. Diane's daughter from a brief relationship before Russell. The girl lived primarily with her father in Hamilton, but spent holidays with Diane. 12 years old, apparently persistent, apparently observant. "Emma," I said, "how are you?" "I'm okay. I just wanted to ask if you're okay, because Mom cries sometimes when she thinks I can't hear." I sat down. "Thank you for calling me. That took some courage. Is there anything I can do to help? I don't really understand what happened." Sometimes adults make mistakes that take time to sort out. It's not anything you caused. Not anything your mom caused, really. It's complicated. "Okay," she said, and she sounded like she was writing this down. "Are you going to be okay?" "I'm going to be fine," I said, and meant it, which surprised me a little. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. The lake was bright in the morning. A ferry moved across it, slow and sure. I thought about Diane as a child, the seriousness she'd always had, the way she approached problems like they were puzzles to solve. I thought about her marrying someone like Russell, and whether that was a thing she'd chosen or a thing that had happened to her in stages, the way these things often did. I called Loretta. "I spoke to a child this morning," I said. "Diane's daughter. Emma." "Yes. I want to talk about how we handle this going forward. I'm not interested in prolonged punishment. I'm interested in accountability and some kind of honest reckoning." Loretta was quiet for a moment. "What are you proposing?" "A conversation with Diane, without Russell, on my terms and in my time. I can arrange neutral ground. The cafe at the Harborfront Center. Sunday, 11 in the morning. Tell her I'll be there. Tell her to come alone." Diane arrived 7 minutes early. I know because I was already there, at a corner table, coffee in hand, watching the door. She looked like she'd aged since Loretta's office. She was wearing the coat I'd bought her for her 30th birthday, which may have been deliberate or may have been the first thing she'd grabbed. "I've never been able to read my daughter that precisely." She sat down. "Didn't speak right away. That was new." "I ordered you a tea," I said. "Earl Grey. Still?" She nodded. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She looked like herself underneath it, which was something. "I'm not here to punish you," I said. "I want to say that first. You have every right to." "I know. I'm choosing not to. I let that land, but I need you to understand something, Diane. Not about the money. I don't actually care if you knew about the money or not. What I need you to understand is what happened when Russell said what he said, and you stood in that hallway and said nothing." She flinched. "I know. You are my daughter. I buried your mother. I paid for your education, your first car, the down payment on a house that your husband now treats as his own kingdom. And when he told your father he was a burden and to get out, you stood there." She stopped, started again. I didn't know how to, stopped again. "You were scared of him," I said. "I know. I've watched it for 6 years. I said this quietly, not as an accusation, as a thing I'd observed and was now naming." She put her face in her hands for a moment. When she looked up, something had shifted. "He's not always like that." "I know that too. But he's like that more than I want to admit." We sat with that for a moment. "I'm going to tell you what I want," I said, "and then you're going to decide if you want it too. No pressure, no consequences if you say no. I'm 67 years old, and I have $4.6 million and a very nice view of Lake Ontario. I will be fine either way." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Her face crumpled for a second and then held. "I want us to have a relationship," I said. "A real one, not the performance we've been doing where I pretend to need you and you pretend my living in your hallway is sustainable. A real one, where I'm your father and you're my daughter and we talk honestly about what's happening in our lives." I paused. "I want you to see a counselor, on your own, not couples therapy with Russell. On your own, for you." She looked at me steadily. "Is that an ultimatum?" "It's a request. From your father who loves you. There's a difference." She nodded slowly. "The estate is being restructured," I said. "I'm not going to go into detail today, but I am going to make sure that whatever I have goes to people and causes that matter to me. You are one of those people. Emma is one of those people. Whether Russell benefits from that arrangement depends entirely on whether he becomes someone worth benefiting." Diane looked out the window at the water. "What do I tell him about today?" "Tell him whatever you want. That's between you and him." "But Diane..." I waited until she looked at me. "You have a life outside of what he decides. You've always had one. I'd like you to remember that." She reached across the table and took my hand. I let her. We talked for another hour. Small things, mostly. How the medication was making me feel. Something funny a student had said to her last week, whether the cafe's pastries were any good. By the time we left, the stiffness between us had shifted into something more honest, more careful, more real. She called me 4 days later. She'd booked an appointment with a therapist. Her voice was steady and quiet when she told me, the way it gets when she's decided something. Russell called me once more. I let it ring. He left a message that said he'd been reflecting on his behavior and would like the opportunity to apologize in person. I noted the call and did nothing with it. When Diane asked me later whether I'd consider meeting with him, I said, maybe, eventually, if I saw genuine change over time. Not a performance, not crisis management, change. She accepted that. I had dinner at my cousin Janet's house in Etobicoke that November. My mother's side of the family, 6 or 7 of us around a table, the way it used to be. I hadn't seen some of them in 2 years. My cousin's husband asked about my new place. I said it was downtown. Nice view, very quiet. He asked if I wasn't lonely. I told him I'd spent 2 years being lonely in a house full of people. This was better. Nobody asked about money. The people who knew me didn't need to. The people who didn't know me well enough didn't ask. I started volunteering in January with a business mentorship program through the Toronto Public Library. Small business owners, immigrants mostly, people building something from scratch, the way I had. I went Tuesday mornings. I listened more than I talked, which is the thing I should have been doing all along. I met Diane and Emma for brunch every second Sunday at a restaurant we chose together, rotating so nobody had to drive too far. Emma turned 13 in February. I gave her a gift card to an art supply store she liked and a book about graphic novels she'd mentioned once, months ago, not expecting me to remember. She looked at me like I'd done something remarkable. You remembered, she said. I pay attention, I told her. I did. I'd always paid attention. I just stopped expecting it to be noticed. My cardiologist appointment in March came back with improved numbers. The medication was doing its work. Keep this up, he said, and we'll bore each other for years. I drove home along the lakeshore with the window cracked and the smell of spring coming in and thought, yes, that sounds exactly right. Loretta finalized the will in April. The bulk of the estate, just over $3 million, goes to 3 organizations, a hospice that cared for Eleanor in her final weeks, a youth trades apprenticeship program I'd mentored through, and the conservation land trust in the Bruce Peninsula that Eleanor had loved. Emma's education trust is set at $300,000, accessible at 21. Diane receives $250,000 outright, no conditions because she is my daughter, and love and accountability are not the same as punishment. Russell receives nothing. That will not change. When Diane asked me, carefully, whether there was anything for her husband, I said no. She nodded. She didn't argue. That told me more than anything else she could have said. On a Saturday in May, I walked from my building down to the market, bought a bag of sour cherry preserves and a sourdough loaf and some cheese, and carried them back up in the elevator to my kitchen. Made myself lunch. Sat at the table by the window. The lake was the particular color it gets in late spring, somewhere between gray and green moving. I thought about Russell in the doorway of his kitchen, arms crossed, telling me I was a burden they'd been carrying. I thought about Diane's face in the hallway, looking at the floor. I thought about Emma calling me from Hamilton on a Wednesday morning because she'd noticed her mother crying. I thought about Eleanor and what she would have done, and how she had always been better at forgiveness than I was, and how she would have told me that forgiveness isn't the same as letting people off. It's just the thing you do so the weight doesn't become yours to carry. I wasn't there yet. Maybe I was getting there. What I knew, sitting at my own table, eating lunch I'd made myself, in a home I'd chosen with my own money on my own terms, was that the sick, old man they'd wanted out of their house had never existed. That man was an invention, a role I'd played long enough to learn everything I needed to know. The man sitting by the window, watching the lake, had built a company from nothing, buried the woman he loved, raised a daughter who was, slowly, becoming brave, and he had years ahead of him. His own years, finally, completely his. I keep coming back to the moment I stood at that kitchen sink drying my hands while Russell told me I was a burden they'd been carrying. Not because it still hurts, it doesn't, not the way it did that night, but because of how quiet I was, how completely unsurprised. That's the thing nobody talks about when these situations finally break open. The ending rarely comes as a shock. It arrives as a confirmation of something you already knew but weren't ready to name. I had been watching for 2 years. Watching Russell's eyes follow the envelope each month. Watching Diane make herself smaller in rooms where he was loudest. Watching gratitude curdle into assumption, the way it always does when people confuse generosity with obligation. What I understand now, sitting on the right side of all of it, is that the outcome wasn't decided the night Russell said what he said. It was decided much earlier, by the choices each of us had been making for years, quietly, in the small moments that don't feel significant until they add up to everything. Russell made his choices from a place of entitlement. He assumed that because he couldn't see my resources, they didn't exist. He assumed that because I was older and quieter, I was also weaker. He assumed that the man who asked for nothing must have nothing. Every one of those assumptions was a failure of honest thinking, the kind of clear-eyed assessment of reality that I had spent 31 years building a business on. When you stop thinking honestly about the people around you, you start making very expensive mistakes. Diane made her choices from a place of fear. And I understand that more than I ever let on, because fear is a reasonable response to certain kinds of pressure. But there's a version of courage that has nothing to do with loudness or confrontation. It's the quieter kind, the willingness to stand still and tell the truth when the easier thing would be to look at the floor. Diane is learning that. I watched her find it, slowly in the months since. It costs her something every time. That's how I know it's real. As for me, I made my choices from a place of patience, not passivity. There's a difference, and I spent a long time making sure I knew which one I was practicing. I stayed in that Oakville bedroom not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I wanted to know who these people really were when they thought the stakes were low. What people do when they believe no one important is watching. That's character. That's the only honest measure of it. I didn't set out to teach Russell a lesson. I set out to protect myself and to find out whether my daughter was someone I could still build something real with. The consequences that fell on Russell were the natural result of what he'd built with his own hands. I didn't engineer his humiliation. I simply stopped absorbing it. What Emma understood at 12 years old, calling from Hamilton on a Wednesday morning because she'd noticed her mother crying. That's the part I think about most. She did the decent thing because it was the decent thing. No calculation, no angle, no awareness of what it might cost her, just a child doing what her conscience told her to do. The rest of us, frankly, could stand to be more like that. I'm 67 years old. I have a view of Lake Ontario, a Tuesday morning mentoring program, and a standing brunch with my daughter and granddaughter every second Sunday. I'm not carrying anyone else's weight anymore. And I'm not bitter. Bitterness is just grief that forgot what it was originally for. What I am is clear, finally completely clear.